Good afternoon. My name is Kevin Johnson, your moderator for the hour, and welcome to Wednesdays at the Center. We're hosted by the John Hope Franklin Center and Duke University Center for International and Global Studies. Today, we are pleased to welcome Mr. Brandon Williams, who will have a talk entitled Walltown Forever, Resisting Displacement through Multiracial and Intergenerational Organizing. Mr. Brandon Williams holds a 2 graduate Duke certificates, one in 2006, a BA in African and African American Studies, and a master's in divinity with a prison studies certificate in 2013. So please keep your microphones muted and submit your questions and comments in the chat. So please, let us welcome Mr. Brandon Williams.
Thank you, Kevin, for the introduction, and thank you to the Center for this opportunity to share and speak with you all today. My name is Brandon Williams. I am a resident of the Walltown neighborhood in Durham, North Carolina, and today we'll be sharing with you about the work that we've been doing there over the last 3 years, and looking forward to engaging folks in a conversation around what it means to think about equitable development, affordable housing, and how to organize around these things using kind of the strengths of communities and neighborhoods. So today, I'll just start briefly with some of these photos here on a slide. For those that may not be familiar with Walltown, it is a neighborhood just north of Duke's East Campus and is named after a man named George Wall, who was enslaved in North Carolina in Randolph County, and after emancipation was recruited to come and work at Trinity College. And upon Trinity's move to Durham in the late 1890s, George was invited to come with the college to Durham. He accepted that invitation and then settled in what is now known as Walltown. And you can see his house there in the middle. That house was built, the deed on that is 1906. So it's kind of when we say the neighborhood was founded, Walltown established 1906, and it still exists today. The family still owns that home on Onslow Street. And since then, Walltown's been home to generations of working class Black families who is, you'll come to say in our refrain, have responded to structural racism with self-determination and resilience. In the bottom left corner here, that photo is of our Walltown Community Association Northgate Mall committee. It's a group of 7 of us who've mostly been working over the last 2-3 years with other residents, but to lead this work. And myself, a couple of people who grew up in the neighborhood their whole lives. Audrey Mitchell, who's the president of the Community Association, has been president for the last 30 plus years. A young woman named Nora, whose family has been in the neighborhood for 4 generations. And she lives there now with her daughter, Dawn, whose mom lives and grew up in the neighborhood. And then myself and the other 3 kind of youngerish white folks have all been in the neighborhood maybe about 6 to 7 years. I've been there 8. I think Emily and Diane about 6 or 7, and Marcus in the back has been there about 2 with his family. So a mixed group of folks, combining people who have been longtime residents with newer residents, and but working kind of from the same principle in mind that we want to preserve space and identity for residents that have been there, and to make sure that Walltown, in a real sense, can last forever. We'll jump into just an outline of what we want to go over today, really looking to share the things that we've done and what we've learned So we'll start a little bit with just kind of that spirit of self-determination, how that's been reinvigorated in this process, and kind of overview the activities that we've done in the redevelopment of the mall. We'll then kind of focus on kind of narrative power and kind of how we've used stories to kind of activate new and old residents to engage with us in this process. Visualizing change, we'll talk about kind of how we've employed data and maps to advance our efforts. And then thinking about expanding democracy, kind of like what are some policy and practice implications for affordable housing and city planning and kind of organizing around those issues. So starting just kind of like where this all began, at the end of 2018, the Walltown Community Association, we're hosting our kind of annual holiday gathering at the Walltown Rec Center, and news had broke of the purchase of Northgate Mall. It was acquired by a global real estate firm called Northwood Investors, and kind of the local housing development iteration of Northwood Investors is Northwood Raven. So you'll hear me refer to Northwood Raven as the stakeholder we've been working with as a developer. But they're part of this larger global real estate firm, Northwood Investors. And when we learned of that, we kind of, folks kind of immediately knew, had been paying attention to the way that gentrification and property tax increases were impacting neighbors, and knew that with a new tenant at the mall, particularly looking at some of the kinds of properties that Northwood has in other places, that this would, in some sense, be kind of like the nail in the coffin in terms of being able to maintain place for longtime homeowners, for folks renting, people who had been in the neighborhood for a long time, and even just the identity that it felt like a real sense of erasure could be upon us. And so we wanted to do something about it. Not quite sure at the time, but we began just by going to city council and sharing some of our concerns with the then council. And then we started with our community and our residents, and we had a housing forum at St. John's Missionary Baptist Church, and just began to listen to stories of folks to share kind of their concerns about housing and affordability, questions they had about the development, what the implications for that development might be for folks living in the neighborhood. And upon kind of that forum, really launched a process for us to gather more information. We went and canvassed the neighborhood, 250 plus surveys from residents, even went to the mall to talk to tenants and shoppers. We then took that survey information and we had 3 focus groups that included 51 Walltown residents to kind of really validate the survey findings and drill down on what was most important to people as we began to advocate for the neighborhood. And out of those focus groups, we developed a strategic vision. We had a reveal at Walltown Community Center. Over 100 people came out to that to be able to share kind of the 10-point solutions that we had for addressing the redevelopment and really desiring to see an equitable redevelopment. And the 2 kind of themes that stuck out from that I'll kind of come back to over the presentation are that people wanted to be able to kind of preserve and build wealth for Walltown residents, particularly thinking about our longtime residents and homeowners, and that we also wanted to have an equitable development process that could really engage people, across the neighborhood and other neighborhoods, as I'll share in the what would come to be at the mall. The mall really being known as a place that was kind of a public square. You could find elders and seniors walking the mall in the mornings. The food court, up until its close, was still a lively place where people would gather. It would be that kind of public square space. We would meet with city council members and other organizations, city staff, throughout this process there in the food court until it closed when the pandemic hit. So really people wanting to kind of think about and keep that mall as a public square space, and thinking about what it would mean to kind of develop it in that way was the second prong. Then we had, thinking about kind of where we were at. Um, we wanted to be able to also engage with the other communities around the mall. So Walltown, as I'll show in a minute, is really most proximate to the mall and would feel the impact of the redevelopment most intensely. But we knew also that there are 6 other communities surrounding the mall, and that it would be important just in terms of our own kind of political power to engage with them and bring them into this process. So we formed what's called the Northgate Mall Neighborhood Council. Talk some more about that. Had a design charrette with those neighborhoods to come up with some of our own designs and maps for the redevelopment process. We then engaged neighbors on a survey based on those alternative designs that we came up with. And then since then, we've been taking those findings and really trying to use them to advocate for some refined goals around affordable housing, affordable retail, accessible community and green space, and environmental sustainability on the site. So I had a press conference there. And then we've just been engaging ongoing with Northwood Raven, with Duke, who also owns a part of the mall property. They own the old Macy's, plan to turn that into a health clinic, and the council, Durham City Council. So this is a little broad overview of kind of what we've been up to. We'll talk some more about where things are at now a little bit later on, but want to kind of share with you the learnings from kind of what we've done in the engagement. So the people most proximate to the problem, want to give you just a location, a sense of where we're at. So on this map that you see here, the yellow space is the Northgate Mall property. And as you can see, just to the left there, kind of Walltown sits right alongside the mall, along with Trinity Park, Northgate Park, Watts Hospital, Hillendale, Old West Durham, Trinity Heights, Duke Park, in the surrounding areas. And so those other 6 neighborhoods are who we invited to join us in our Northgate Mall Neighborhood Council. So as we sought to take our strategic vision and kind of visualize that, we engaged with those neighborhoods to create some alternative designs for the mall, in contrast to what the developer had come up with. And we'll look at those a little bit later. But you might often hear the term kind of most impacted people talked about in social justice spaces. And I think it's just important to highlight proximity here for us in terms of driving why we wanted to really have Walltown be at the center of this organizing effort. I think geographically, this shows a reason for that. But we'll also talk about some of the data reasons why that is important and why a Walltown-driven solution to the redevelopment was really critical. These are just some photos to give you a sense of kind of the energy and activity that we've had throughout the course. Some of our focus groups and community meetings that we've undertaken. Okay, so gonna shift to kind of first set of like lessons learned in what we've been doing, talking about narrative power, using stories to activate new and old residents for political engagement. So first, I think it's important to highlight kind of like what stories we're telling as we've gone through this process. And there are 2 things I'd like to highlight here. First is that we've made space for and amplified the present day stories of residents and the challenges they're facing to remain in the neighborhood. And so that really started with kind of, the community forums, the surveys that we did and the focus groups, really trying to engage with neighbors around how gentrification and rising property taxes, new development is impacting their lives. Then we also knew we wanted to really be able to contextualize those experiences, what we're going through right now, by lifting up historical examples of when Walltown residents face similar challenges and the solutions they employed to resolve them. So to know and kind of remind ourselves that this is not the first time a group of people in this particular neighborhood, it's not the first time this neighborhood has experienced a challenge from outside forces and has kind of organized to respond to those. And so you'll see here kind of the hook, what you would find in many of our documents, the stories that we would tell in public spaces and conversations with folks, was that Walltown was founded in 1906 by George Wall, as I mentioned, and that since then the neighborhood has been home to generations of Black working class families who in the face of structural racism have embodied a spirit of self-determination and resilience. And one of these stories even pertains to the mall itself. So that in the late 80s, when Northgate Mall was under the ownership of the Rand family, they sought to encroach upon residential space in the neighborhood, and residents then organized to keep that part of the land. They wanted to come across Guest Road, which is one of the major thoroughfares, and residents organized to make sure that they could keep that land residential. And so we then said, now that the mall is in another state of transition, Walltown is organized again. So I think it was really important for us to remind ourselves and also to kind of lead with that as we engaged with other partners and neighborhoods and organizations to join us, that the reason that Walltown is driving this agenda, and the reason why that matters is because of this history and narrative of folks facing these external challenges, being the folks most proximate to the problem, most impacted by the problem, and we'll get to the impact of property taxes and how that's been disparate. And to really lead with this story as a way to say, we're going to center these longtime Black residents. We're going to center this historically Black neighborhood as we seek to organize and cast vision for what the mall could be like. And in that centering, we're not just centering the challenges and problems they're facing, but also kind of this history of self-determination and resilience and the ability to organize. And one story here that I think is really important to highlight that has captured my, captured my heart and mind, I think, when I first moved to the neighborhood. And it bears mentioning that I moved into the neighborhood about 2013. I was directing a youth organization in the neighborhood at the time called Urban Hope. And one of the things we would do in that youth organization, we had a summer camp. I was the second director of the organization and had been a part of it years before as a staff person. And during the summer, we would have longtime residents come in and have a meal with young people, young adults working at the camp. And they would tell, just the stories of what it was like to grow up in the neighborhood in the 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s as a way to really instill that kind of generational memory and storytelling, to give context to our young people, about kind of where they came from and kind of just the power and ability to kind of live in community together and what that can allow you to do. One particular example is that in the 50s, the neighborhood wanted to have a community center. And there was a man named Frizzell Day who worked as a janitor at City Hall, and so had proximity to kind of like the power in the city and knew kind of who the folks were that they would need to kind of engage with in order to try to make this happen. And so Frizzell Day and what was known as the town council advocated with the city to get some land, and they were granted some land that currently sits where the Walltown Park is at in the current Walltown Rec Center on Club Boulevard. They were given that land, but they were not given any resources or money to be able to build a building. And so they took the land though, and then residents themselves contributed their own labor and materials to build a one-room community center that stood for about 20 years there until when it was no longer viable. Residents then advocated again with the city to build a new modern rec center, which it would take over about 20 years for them to get one. And what is now the Walltown Rec Center has been standing since 2010. Just that history of, advocating for community center, building it on your own, then having to advocate again, taking 20 years to get it, that history was really important for us in this work. We're telling out how are we telling those stories? So that was those stories of self-determination and resilience was key and critical. And then we're telling that everywhere. Folks are talking about this on their porches and sidewalks, interacting with neighbors over meals. We used it in our outreach materials, as we invited other neighborhoods and organizations to join our efforts. Just everywhere we could, leading with those stories so that, again, we ground ourselves in the power of community that stretches back for generations. And in the picture here, we were taking a walk of the property that's at Northgate Mall to try and kind of reimagine what it is we would want to see there, and telling stories along the way in that space as well. And one of the key places that I want to kind of share in terms of partnership was that we connected with the City of Durham's community engagement team, and they began a series called Our Community Stories. And Our Community Stories, just a way for the city, was trying to help, particularly its staff, understand the neighborhoods and communities that make up the city, who they're engaging with. And so they've been running this series now for over a year. We were the first community to tell our story. And essentially it was myself and two other longtime residents who, I had heard tell stories for several years. We just brought that conversation to the city. It's recorded. It's on YouTube. You can find that online. But one of the things that I think was really helpful in that, giving that a broader audience for us, was that it really helped us to connect with new residents, all right, that wanted to support justice and equity initiatives. So once they kind of heard these kind of longtime homeowners and residents talking about the experience of living and growing up in a neighborhood, connecting that to the current day issues that we're working with, it gave people insight in ways to how to engage with us now, and to go about doing that with an understanding of that they're entering into this kind of longer story. We also were able to make connection across communities with similar histories and shared struggles. And I'll talk some about that a little bit later. But other communities in the city who are going through similar things, we were able to kind of connect with in our organizing efforts. And then also, I think telling these stories helps hold elected officials and city government accountable to stated values and vision for shared prosperity and racial equity. So when these stories are out in the open, in the mainstream, when city government is telling itself these stories, right, it builds a little bit of a space for accountability and buy-in to listening and centering the experiences of longtime Black communities. So next, I want to kind of hit on how we've used data and maps to advance our efforts. And this has been really super powerful. And, we've really partnered a lot here. And I have a slide at the end just to kind of highlight the ecosystem of community organizing that we've kind of interacted with in this space. But two organizations bear mentioning here. One is DataWorks NC, which is a local nonprofit that uses data to support community organizations. And so we'll talk a couple on the slides. DataWorks has really been instrumental in supporting our efforts. And then the other is partnering with the Coalition for Affordable Housing and Transit, and some folks there helping connect us with NC State's environmental planning and architectural design program to help us do some alternative designs for the mall. So first couple of slides here are just talking about a brief history of housing in Walltown. And so we talked about kind of being most proximate to the problem in terms of Walltown's geographic location, the Northgate Mall. But the other story we wanted to be able to talk about is how the recent gentrification and development has had an outsized impact on Walltown homeowners. And so this goes back to redlining. And so we were able to use maps here. On the left, you can see the 1937 housing policy around the kind of Northgate Mall neighborhoods. And you see right there in Walltown, red in the heart of the neighborhood. And some of the lines there, look disproportionate to the current geographic outline of the community, just in that the footprint was a bit smaller. But you see that redlining in the area. And for those that might not be familiar, knowing that redlining, when the FHA was established after in the kind of New Deal era, redlining was a policy for where banks were not going to invest. So it was classified as a hazardous investment, which Black neighborhoods of color were marked in that way, and led to generations of underinvestment. And that underinvestment then meant that in kind of the last 20 or so years, as investment has returned to city centers and urban areas, you're seeing extreme rises in property tax values as people start to pour money back in. And so you can look at the property tax map and see these changes, these marked changes in value from 2017 to 2019. And the Walltown area, the kind of dark blue, dark green, and even the magenta signal kind of the highest percentage rise in rate. So your dark green is like 66 to 100%. The dark blue is 100 to 300%. And the magenta signal 300 to 800% rises in property taxes. And so you see how different it is in Walltown versus the surrounding areas. And so being able to kind of map and visualize and show that relationship, I think was really important for us as we were trying to, again, tell that story of being most proximate to the problem and kind of most impacted by the problem. On top of the rising property taxes, trying to then go a level deeper, what DataWorks helped us to do was kind of look at also income levels in Walltown. And so who's been most impacted by these rising property taxes? You can see the chart to the right here, the median household incomes, that Black households, it's lower for Black households than it is for white households. And then you kind of contract that onto median sale prices of single family homes as they've continued to rise. So the neighborhood's gotten more and more, less and less affordable in terms of home ownership. Black households are making less than white households. And that shift, in terms of just demographic numbers, over the last 30 years, there's been a 32-point decline in the percentage of Black residents in the neighborhood. So in 1990, Black residents made up 56 or 58% of Walltown residents. In the 2020 census, Black residents now make up 24% of Walltown residents. So you think about those demographic shifts, the income shifts, kind of who the new neighbors coming in are making more money. They can pay for more expensive homes. That helps to drive up the property tax rate. And so you can see kind of how those things kind of converge to cause the problems that we're trying to resolve right now. So those three maps, the income map too, you can see just respective to other neighborhoods around Northgate Mall, that Walltown, again, the white areas and the light blue areas are lower incomes, and the darker blue areas represent higher incomes, and Walltown just is very distinct than the other neighborhoods around the mall. So connecting to that, one of the goals that we had for Northgate development was to have a significant amount of affordable housing. We were, I think, on our initial request, wanted to see 30% of the units at the new Northgate meet affordable housing requirements. Now, what we were able to elevate in our research around this, and I think this is one of the kind of big policy implications for affordable housing, particularly in kind of thinking about working class neighborhoods similar to Walltown, is affordable housing for whom? So there are federal guidelines that that developers go by when they're going to think about building affordable housing, integrating affordable housing into their properties, and these are instituted by HUD. And so HUD uses a figure called area median income, or AMI, and the map for Durham is intertwined a bit with Chapel Hill, which in some ways raises that area median income. So in Durham, the area median income is $90,000. And we were able to kind of track that number against what the median income in Walltown is, which is $37,000. So to kind of break down how that creates challenges, if someone's building affordable housing into a development, they're going to take a number like 80 or 60% of that area median income, and they're going to build homes that would be affordable to people making that amount of money. And as you can see here from the chart, 80 or 60% of the $90,000 means you would have a monthly income of $4,500 to $6,000, and your affordable monthly housing costs. So if you think about housing costs, affordable meaning 30% of your monthly income would be $1,300 to $1,800. But in Walltown, the neighborhood median income is $37,000, and so you can already see that income level is below the 60 or 80% number. And so most affordable housing is going to be in that 60 to 80% number. But we know if we're at that level, that we're not going to reach residents in our neighborhood with those opportunities. And so I think there's a real opportunity to kind of dig into AMI and how it's used in affordable housing, and particularly when we're thinking about reaching longtime residents in neighborhoods, working class neighborhoods like Walltown. And at the bottom, you can see Northwood Raven, has built several other properties in the area. And so we were also able to kind of map out kind of their average listed rents compared to the affordable housing. So, at 60% of AMI, you could afford $1,300. That'll get you a studio apartment at the typical Northwood Raven development and property. So this kind of lets you know kind of where we were working at, some of the challenges we're facing, and trying to elevate what it means to really make housing affordable for residents in our neighborhood. The next set of kind of visualization that we worked on was actually creating alternative visions for Northgate. And so what you see here on this slide, 4 different designs. And NMNC, that's the Northgate Mall Neighborhood Council. That's the group of 7 neighborhoods that we convened to come together and build these designs. Those groups, we had 3 alternatives that we put forth. And in the bottom right-hand corner, you see Northwood Raven's proposal. So this is a proposal. They actually had produced a bubble map that they shared publicly, and our design team from NC State and the Coalition for Affordable Housing and Transit took that bubble map and kind of rendered it spatially similar to our alternatives, so we could have some way to have people compare and contrast. And I think this was a really another kind of key instrumental moment in the process for us. So at this point in time, we had developed our strategic vision, which laid out some priorities for equitable development of the mall. But we didn't have a way to visualize those priorities. And so connected one of our partners at the Coalition for Affordable Housing and Transit, who said, would you like to, visualize the points that you have, your priorities. We said, yeah, we'd love to do that. Don't know how to make that happen. We worked with them and a team of folks at NC State to have a design charrette where we brought together representatives from each of those 7 communities who took kind of an input process. We had like Google Slides and moved the kind of blocks you see on the design maps. We could kind of like drag and drop those onto the Google slide to kind of indicate where we wanted certain kinds of buildings. So like, yellow is housing, the pink is like mixed use, green is green space, brown is like community space. And so we came up, after that process with these 3 designs that we then engaged neighbors with to get feedback on. And I think one of the key things, just one key distinction as we're kind of talking about kind of layout of land is that we wanted to connect the mall because it had been such a public square space for people. We wanted to continue that by making sure that it had physical connection to the neighborhood. So you can see in alternative 1 up top and alternative 2 how the green space comes down to Guest Road, and across Guest Road right there, it looks blue, but that's because Ellerby Creek runs right there. But that whole space is actually green as well. That's Walltown Park. And so one of our priorities was to be able to connect the green space on the mall site with the green space in Walltown Park, so that there would be kind of a natural flow of residents, and it would feel inviting. It would feel like a community space. Whereas what you see in the Northwood Raven proposal is that they want to have a more privatized park. It'll be called a community park, but if you've seen kind of these kind of mixed use green spaces before, there'll be, office and residential built around that space, which in our perspective would make it very easy to surveil and have, police or security kind of maintaining those boundaries. And you can't see it from the street. So you may not know it's there unless you're going there to shop or work, or unless you live there. So that was just one of the key points, I think, to helping these maps helped us do, was to really be able to visualize the priorities that we wanted to have and put that out in front of folks. All right, gonna wrap up here, and then we have some time for Q&A. Briefly kind of just go over some of the implications for the work that we've been doing, kind of what we've accomplished so far and where we're still headed. So in terms of preserving and building Walltown wealth, what we've accomplished so far is that really is a huge win for us. Is 2 weeks ago, the city council voted to expand the city's longtime homeowners grant program to cover Walltown residents. And so what this means is that residents in Walltown who, again, are under a certain threshold of area median income will be able to apply for a reimbursement of property taxes that they've paid in years prior. And so that's going to be huge to get money back to longtime homeowners, who many of whom in Walltown are seniors and on fixed incomes. And so again, thinking about how those property taxes impact folks who are not in their prime earning years, right? So these are folks, if you're getting a pension check or retirement check, an increase of $800 or $1,500 in your property taxes is huge, and really can threaten foreclosure and threaten, your family losing out on that wealth building asset of a home. And so one of the things to point out is a huge win. And data, again, really helped us in this process, working with DataWorks. We were able to show, how many potential people could benefit by expanding to the neighborhood, and how much it would cost the city, and also demonstrate how Walltown already met the criteria of the current program, and so making an argument that we should be added. We're still looking to get an expanded income limits on the county's property tax relief program, trying to move that from 30 to 60% of AMI so that more households would be eligible, and expanding their grant amount from $750 to $1,000 at least. In terms of equitable redevelopment of the mall, so far, I would say we've accomplished building a broad-based coalition of residents who support our goals: affordable housing, affordable retail, and we've gotten public commitment from the current council to not allow rezoning without engaging our coalition. And this is something that I failed to mention earlier on, which I just said, what power do we have? What leverage do we have with the developers at Northgate? And that is the zoning. And zoning is what, it belongs to the public, as one of our planning commissioners has stated, but the zoning on the Northgate Mall property only allows for them to build at a height of 50 feet or less. And so, which would give them about 4 stories worth of building. But we know to make the most of their investment, they would like to rezone that and be able to expand the height capacity, building upwards of, 10, 12 stories. I think there are plans for a hotel on the site. And so right now they cannot rezone without going through a public process that would need to ultimately be approved by the city council. And the city council has publicly stated that they will not allow for that rezoning without engagement from our coalition, from the developer. So that's a win right now. There are elections coming up this fall. The council is gonna change. So we'll have work to do to make sure that that commitment stays. But I think, it's been a part of the local conversations for candidates in terms of like, how do they see the Northgate Mall situation? So that's a win. We're still looking for meaningful engagement from the developer to discuss how we can negotiate integration of our goals in exchange for that rezoning. So, we're willing to allow for that increase in height if we can work in affordable housing, retail, the other priorities that we have. I want to quickly just point out just kind of the ecosystem of community organizing that we've engaged with. We've had lots of partnership. It's been really crucial and key to us. So, on the right side, you kind of see lots of the government and property stakeholders in terms of Durham City County Planning, Council, Northwood Raven, Duke's Office of Durham and Community Affairs, who's been liaising with us on the health clinic site, and then a bunch of other kind of nonprofits and organizations, university spaces that have provided support to us. DataWorks, I mentioned Coalition for Affordable Housing and Transit. Duke Law School's Community Enterprise Clinic was really critical in the early goings to do research on Northwood as an investment firm and to help us better understand the kinds of development that they did and they do in other places. Ellerby Creek Watershed Association has helped us understand the environmental impacts on Ellerby Creek, which runs underneath the mall. And again, engaging across these other 6 neighborhood associations to form that Northgate Mall Neighborhood Council has been crucial, I think, to building our political power. So I just want to kind of underscore that part, engaging multiple partners here and thinking about who you can bring on as supporters in the work. And then lastly, I'm going to end with just a few policy ideas and recommendations that have come up for us over the last 3 years. One that we're currently pursuing right now is for folks in other places here in Durham, use American Rescue Plan Act funding to support Black, Indigenous, people of color-led development initiatives that center long-time and low-income residents from historically and systematically marginalized neighborhoods. And so we, in fact, have put in a joint application with 2 other neighborhoods in Durham, Bragtown and Merrick Moore, along with DataWorks, to essentially allow us to do some research over the next couple of years on kind of emerging best practices for kind of community ownership, affordable housing in urban spaces, and then to grant us a fund. We're asking for $5 million to help seed the implementation of the ideas that come out of our research. So I think there's a great opportunity right now with the ARPA funding to really give power and and implementation power to long-time and low-income residents. And then one of the things here we want to highlight is just like in cases where like a development like Northgate Mall will have a significant impact on surrounding neighborhoods, we really think the county planning department should, employ its own staff or hire a third-party contractor to facilitate robust community engagement, right? And developers could pay a fee that contribute to the cost, depending on the extent of the process. But one of the challenging, frustrating things that happened in our efforts was that the developer Northwood Raven was told that they needed to do some community engagement. But they were given recommendations of firms to hire. So they hired their own firm to do a community engagement process. But under that model, right, the power still remains with the developer. And that process did not yield nearly the amount of engagement and ideas that we were able to produce. And so we do think that this should not be a responsibility that falls to community organizations solely, but that the facilitation piece should come from city government to facilitate between developers and communities, residents, in this process. And then lastly, just we want to develop housing policies that support, protect, and empower both longtime homeowners and renters. These policies should advance models of community ownership, make it harder to evict and displace people, and provide greater accountability and oversight for landlords. We haven't been able to spend a bunch of time in terms of renters in our neighborhood up to this point, but there are a lot of great efforts. Bull City Tenants Union is an organization really advancing some really good renters' rights policies in the city. They have a Durham Homes Guarantee that's being put forth right now. And I think that's just another part to it in terms of keeping people in their homes and communities is both home ownership and not having people be able to kind of mitigate these rising property taxes, but also facing the challenges that renters are facing that we all know of, particularly in this pandemic, the looming eviction crisis that we're in right now. I'm going to stop there and I think we'll have about 12 minutes for question and answers. Please, if you want to learn more about our work, you can go to our website at www.walltown.net and email us at our Walltown Northgate committee.
Thank you very much, Brandon Williams. That was extremely informative. And this is a time for Q&A right now. So I would like to kick off the first question. This was very interesting to me. Mr. Jeff Furman he was the operations director at Northwood Raven, and he proposed to the mayor of Durham for people to work with the city to change public policy to relieve gentrification. I thought that was pretty interesting for a private landowner to say that to a mayor of a city. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, so there was an exchange between the mayor and Jeff as we were trying to kind of highlight the city's role, I think, in putting pressure on the developer. So I think, predictably, Jeff was trying to kind of throw that responsibility back to the city. And I do think there are things that the city can do to enhance their support of residents in these processes. I mean, one is just expanding these property tax grants to residents. So we finally were able to get in there, but I think there are some other neighborhoods and communities that could benefit from that. So you do want to be able to stabilize folks in neighborhoods that are experiencing development so that they don't get pushed out. And then you also, I think, want to create some different models of ownership when it comes to housing. I think there's kind of social housing, community housing, land trusts, land banks that can help make ownership more accessible to people over longer periods of time. And currently, I mean, I think one of the things, right, like we have a really great affordable housing initiative that's being kind of carried out by the recent bond that was passed here. And while that's going to create a good amount of housing stock for low-income folks in the city, one thing is that a lot of that is focused on rental properties. And so there won't be a ton of ownership opportunities in there. And so I think, that's one of the things we're interested in, and think the city kind of can really help residents think through, is kind of what are some alternative ownership models that help people tap into kind of the equity and wealth building aspects, while also resisting the market pressures that displace folks.
Okay. Okay. Well, thank you so much for that. But we have there's a question in the chat that's pretty interesting. Would love to hear more about the loss for movement of Black-owned businesses that were in Northgate Mall prior to its closing. And it seemed like it was often a gathering place and a small business hub. What do you think about that?
Yeah, no, I mean, agree 100%. Our second goal, one of the things we've really tried to focus on, is affordable retail at the site, and thinking about, one of the things we think about gentrification and displacement. It's physical. You get moved out of one place. Another way also that it happens is you think culturally. So you think a new place is coming in, but part of the affordable retail part is that we want to make sure that Black-owned businesses, Latino-owned businesses can return to the mall and create some of the similar cultural aesthetic and vibe that was there in the food court. And we don't have a current list. I know some folks at Durham Tech were helping to assist in that transition when they shut down the mall. They were helping some of those businesses transition and try to find other places in the city. We think we can, work with the developer to have some retail set-asides, so that essentially they, might charge a higher price to some of their larger anchor tenants, so that they can then accommodate more local small business owners who might have restaurants or other kinds of shops. So that's one way we are thinking about that, and agree that we need to have retail that is both kind of local and affordable, but also culturally appropriate and meets the kind of same kind of cultural vibe that was there prior.
Okay, great. I have another interesting question, similar to the question about timeline. I think you've seen the plan that has been discussed with the planning department. How can you move those plans in a better direction? Who do we solicit?
Yeah, no, great question. The timeline. I think right now I'm not clear as to when demolition of the mall will happen. We've had a pretty good communication channel with the city county planning department in terms of when documents and applications get submitted on the property, and when they get approved. So there is a site plan that's been submitted, but the demolition, when that will occur, I'm unclear of right now. What I think is kind of fairly certain is that they're going to move forward with this first phase 1 of building under 50 feet. And they can do that by right. There's nothing that the city can do to kind of stop that process right now. I think it's a bit unfortunate that first phase site plan does not have any of the priorities we've listed included. I mean, in fact, rather than making the property more accessible, there are several kind of retention walls built around some of the site. And so it doesn't look like the first phase is moving in a direction that we'd like. But I think it'll be key, particularly, I think one of the things the developer is waiting on is to see how the new council and mayoral race shakes up, and to see whether or not they'll have greater influence with them than they do with the current council. I don't think they will, but we want to kind of make sure we're in good communication with the new folks once the elections pass, and can really continue to elevate our priorities, and maybe hopefully get the council to leverage a meeting or something that can move the process forward.
We have a raised hand here by Mrs. Kessler.
Okay, sorry, it's working now. Hi, my name's Mimi Kessler. Brandon, you've done a fantastic job. I've been to some of your community meetings, and the community is really in your debt. What I wanted to say was that the process in North Carolina and specifically in Durham is backwards. The community should be saying what they want and builders respond to that. Instead, the state legislature has tied the hands of anybody on a local level of being able to require things like having affordable housing be part of any given development. So I do want for everyone to concentrate on how we change the elected officials, both in Durham as well as across the state, to make this whole process flip around. And even as recently as this morning, in a joint city-county planning committee meeting, there was a request of the people doing the long-term comprehensive plan that they make sure that they talk with developers in order to know what developers want. And all I can say is that the planning department has meetings with developers. It's either weekly or monthly, and they have no meetings with citizens and residents. So we have to change who we elect, and that means going to the polls every single time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mimi. Yeah, I don't think we couldn't agree more in terms of shifting the power dynamics in that process, and really having a planning department, right, that plans on behalf of residents and community, as was stated. So,
Yeah,
AJ Williams.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, I tend to well, first of all, thank you, Brandon, for holding the space. I think it's really important. In fact, it's restoring some of my hope in humanity about what's possible. I did really agree with Mimi's point around the preemptive laws that really prevent localities from being able to do things to the benefit and create more affordable housing opportunities for our communities. But I'm wondering, just like, what's your take in terms of, so like in many parts of the city, right, the damage is already done. Is there any way for the city or the county to actually like retroactively work with developers to make considerations that would benefit surrounding communities like Walltown? Like, is there anything that the city and the county can do? Because I think one thing that's been really amazing with this project that you've presented today is the ways that there was at the top considerations around community needs, and really like stopping the development process and saying, wait, you have to listen to what we're saying, and so I know that has not been the case for many communities in Durham. So just curious if there's any retroactive work that can happen to do some, even what I would call reparative work for the ways that gentrification and development have aggressively entered our city.
Yeah, that's a great question, AJ. And I think two things come to mind. I mean, I think obviously part of it is getting some better power under our local zoning laws, and understanding kind of how we can zone different areas and properties to kind of force that kind of engagement where community has to come in at the top. Some of that I think is tied up with the state legislature. And I think some might just be a better understanding of what powers are granted to local municipalities in that regard. And I think in terms of the retroactive piece, I think that's part of what us, Bragtown and Merrick Moore, want to do with our ARP funding is to study kind of what are some of the current impacts and ways that we can enact benefit for kind of legacy neighborhoods, so to speak. And so I think there's just some study that needs to happen and some investment in a committee that can look at that with the Planning Commission, and then make some recommendations for policies. And that's what we hope to do with our ARP plan, is to do some research over the next couple of years, make some policy recommendations, and then also have a fund to try to implement some of those things.
Hold on, Brandon. Just maybe just a minute, because we're running out of time.
Okay.
I have one last question. Good question. Will there be a plan for urgent care and also some assistance living center?
So that's a great question. I know I've spent most of the time focused on Northwood Raven, but yes, Duke University Health System also owns the Macy's and plans to build a health clinic there. The plans for that clinic, I think, are not like solidified yet and are ever kind of emerging. And we're trying to work. We would like to see, either a community health clinic be a part of that building so that there's accessible healthcare, affordable healthcare there, or some other model whereby residents can get access to healthcare. But there will be a healthcare clinic. It'll be primary, specialists, those kinds of things. We're trying to advocate for there to be more community health services and maybe a community health clinic provided there, maybe expanding the current Walltown clinic into that space.
Okay. Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you for all your comments, your questions. We have run out of time. And I want to thank you, Brendan, and thank you to all attendees who have joined today. So next week at Wednesdays at the Center, we'll have filmmaker and anthropologist Ada Esther Bueno Sardu, who will present a short film called Guerra Mina, a presentation of the North Carolina Latin American and Film Festival. So thank you again, and we hope to see you next Wednesday. Have a great day.